After yesterday's absolutely miserable, full of snow and wind day, the sun has come back out and everything is melting. And Parky has found a sun name. It's amazing how a little bit of sunlight can improve your entire mood, because yesterday I was miserable and pretty much convinced that the sun was never going to come back out and it was going to be winter forever. I mean, in my head, I know that's not true, but that is exactly how I felt. Even when I saw the fox, which if you haven't seen it, I did a short and then a little bit longer clip of just the various weather yesterday. And the fox that came by right as the sun was going down. That was pretty cool. But it was still really cold and really windy. And I felt so bad for the fox because every time the wind blew, the wind chimes out on my porch would ring, and then that would make him freak out and run away. But he really wanted the food that was out there. I put dog food out for the raccoons, and I had already put it out, and I think he smelled it and was like, gimme, gimme, gimme. Or maybe he's been coming by and cleaning up the bird seed and stuff at night. I can't really tell. I've seen some footprints out there, but a lot of times I can't tell who is making them. But it was very exciting, and I definitely had to share that. But now it's time to sit down and share a little bit more of Mr. Charles Dickens' work, A Tale of Two Cities, where it does feel like we're setting up some sort of a love triangle. I peeked a little bit, and we're flipping to a whole new character in this chapter, so just when we get to know a couple, we get introduced to a new one. So that is what we are going to do. We are going to read a chapter. Don't forget, there will not be a chapter tomorrow night. Tomorrow night is my live stream night, and I will be doing that instead. So if you want to come and join me, watch me try not to scream or pull my hair out at my sim, who is usually being very stubborn and annoying. You are more than welcome to do that. It is at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it goes usually until we have another baby, because I'm doing the 100 baby challenge. So that's usually what we go for. But this week we're going to be holding a funeral for our first matriarch. And that's probably going to be a little bit sad, but that's okay. Anyway, none of that has anything to do with this book, which is what we are going to be doing now as we jump back into Chapter 7 of A Tale of Two Cities, Book Number 2, The Golden Thread. And Chapter 7 is titled Monsieur le Marquis in Town. Monseigneur, one of the great lords in power at the court, held his fortnightly reception in his grand hotel in Paris. Monseigneur was in his inner room, his sanctuary of sanctuaries, the holiest of holies to the crowd of worshippers in the suite of rooms outside of it. Monseigneur was about to take his chocolate. Monseigneur could swallow a great many things with ease, and was, by some few sullen minds, supposed to be rather rapidly swallowing France, but his morning's chocolate could not so much as get into the throat of Monseigneur without the aid of 4 strong men and the cook. Yes, it took 4 men, all 4 ablaze with gorgeous decoration, and the chief of them unable to exist with fewer than 2 gold watches in his pocket, emulative of the noble and chaste fashion set by the Monseigneur to conduct the happy chocolate to Monseigneur's lips. One lackey, carried the chocolate pot into the sacred presence. A second milled and frothed the chocolate with the little instrument that he used for that function. A third presented the favored napkin. A fourth, he of the 2 gold watches, poured the chocolate out. It was impossible for Monsignor to disperse with one of these attendants on the chocolate and hold his high place under the admiring heaven. Deep would have been the blot upon him if his chocolate had been ignobly waited on by only 3 men. He would have died if there were only 2. Monsignor had been out at a little supper last night, where the comedy and the grand opera were charmingly represented. Monsignor was out at a little supper most nights, with fascinating company. So polite and so impressible was Monsignor that the comedy and the grand opera had far more influence with him in the tiresome articles of the state of affairs and state secrets than the needs of all of the rest of France. A happy circumstance for France, as the like always is for countries similarly favored. Always was for England, by way of example, back in the merry days of Stuart, who had sold it. Monsignor had one truly noble idea of general public business, which was to let everything go on its own way. Of particular public business, Monsignor had the other truly noble idea that it all must go his way and tend to his own power and pocket. Of his pleasures, general and particular, Monsignor had the other truly noble idea that the world was made for them. The text of his order, altered from the original only by a pronoun which is not very much, said, "The earth and the fullness thereof are mine." At least so saith Monsignor. Yet Monsignor had slowly found that vulgar embarrassments crept into his affairs, both public and private, and he had, as to both classes of affairs, allied himself perforce with a farmer general. As to finances public, because Monsignor could not make anything at all of them, and must consequently let them out to somebody who could, and as to finances private, because farmer generals were rich, and Monsignor, after generations of great luxury and expense, was becoming quite poor. Hence, Monsignor had taken his sister from a convent while there was yet time to ward off the impending veil, the cheapest garment she could wear, and had bestowed her as a prize upon a very rich farmer general who was poor in family. Which farmer general, carrying an appropriate cane with a golden apple on top of it, was now among the company in the outer room, much prostrated before by mankind, always expecting superior mankind of the blood of the Monsignor who, his wife included, looked down upon him with the loftiest of all contempt. A sumptuous man was the farmer general. 30 horses stood in his stables. 24 male domestics sat in his halls. 6 body women waited on his wife. As one who pretended to do nothing but plunder and forage where he could, the farmer general, howsoever his matrimonial relations conducted to social morality, was at least the greatest reality among the people who attended at the hotel of the Monsignor that day. For the rooms, though a beautiful scene to look at and adorned with every device of decoration that taste and skill of the time could achieve, were in truth not a sound business, considered with any reference to the scarecrows and the rags and nightcaps elsewhere. and not so far off either, but in that watching tower of Notre Dame, almost equidistant from the two extremes, could see them both. They would have been an exceedingly uncomfortable business, if they could have been anybody's business, at the house of the Monsignor. Military officers, destitute of military knowledge, naval officers with no idea of a ship, civil officers without a notion of affairs, brazen ecclesiastes of the worst world worthy, with sensual eyes, loose tongues, and looser lives, all completely unfit for their several callings, and all lying horribly in pretending to belong to them, but all nearly or remotely the order of the Monsignor, and therefore foisted on all public employments from which anything was to be got. These were to be told off by the score and score. People not immediately connected with the Monsignor or the state, yet equally unconnected with anything that was real, or with lives passed in traveling by any straight road to an earthly end, were no less abundant. Doctors who made great fortunes out of dainty remedies for imaginary disorders that never existed smiled on their courtly patients in the antechambers of the Monsignor. Projectors who had discovered every kind of remedy for the little evils with which the state was touched, except the remedy of setting to work in earnest to root out a single sin, all poured their distracting babble into any ears they could lay hold of at the reception of the Monsignor. Unbelieving philosophers who were remodeling the world with words and making card towers of babble to scale the walls with, spoke with the unbelieving chemists who had an eye on the transmutation of metals at this wonderful gathering that had been accumulated by the Monsignor. Exquisite gentlemen of the finest breeding, which was at that remarkable time, and has been since, to be known by its fruits of indifference to every natural subject of human interest, were in the most exemplary state of exhaustion at the hotel of the Monsignor. Such homes had these various notables left behind them in the fine world of Paris, that the spies among them assembled devotees of Monsignor, forming a goodly half of the polite company, would have found it hard to discover among the angels of that sphere one solitary wife who, in her manners and appearance, owed to being a mother. Indeed, except for the mere act of bringing a troublesome creature into this world, which does not go far towards the realization of the name of mother, there was no such thing known to the fashion. Peasant women kept the unfashionable babies close and actually brought them up, and charming gentlemen or grandmammas of 60 dressed and supped at 20. The leprosy of unreality disfigured every human creature who was in attendance upon the Monsignor. In the outermost room were half a dozen exceptional people who had, for a few years, some vague misgiving in them that things in general were going rather wrong. As promising way of setting them right, half of the half dozen had become members of the fantastic sect of convulsionists, and were even then considering within themselves whether they should foam, rage, roar, and turn catapletic on the spot, thereby setting up a highly intelligible finger-post to the future for Monsignor's guidance. Next to these dervishes were other three who had rushed into a different sect, which mended manners with jargon about the center of truth, holding that man had gotten out of the center of truth, which didn't need much demonstration, but had not gotten much out of the circumference, and that he was to be kept from flying out of the circumference, and was to even be shoved back into the center by way of fasting and the seeing of spirits. Among these, accordingly, much talk with the spirits went on, and it did a world of good, which never, ever became manifest. But the comfort was, all that company at the Grand Hotel of Monsignor were perfectly dressed. If the Day of Judgment had been ascertained to be a dress day, everyone there would have been eternally correct. Such frizzling and powdering and sticking up of hair, such delicate complexions artificially preserved and mended, such gallant swords to look at, such delicate honor to the sense of smell, would surely keep anything going forever and ever. These exquisite gentlemen of the finest breeding wore little pendant trinkets that clicked as they languidly moved. These golden fetters rang like precious little bells, and what with that ringing, and with the rustle of silk, brocade, and fine linen, there was a flutter in the air that fanned Saint Antoine and his devouring hunger far away. Dress was the one unfailing talisman and charm used for keeping everything in its place. Everybody was dressed for a fancy ball that was to never leave off. From the Palace of Tuileries, through Monsignor and the whole court, through the chambers, the tribunals of justice, and all of society, except of course for the scarecrows, the fancy ball descended to the common executioner who, in pursuance of the charm, was required to officiate the frizzled, powdered in gold lace coats, pumps, and white silk stockings. At the gallows and the wheel, the axe was quite the rarity, Monsieur Paris, as was the episcopal mode among his brother professors of the provinces, Monsieur Orleans, and all the rest, presided in this dainty dress. And who among the company at Monsignor's reception in that 1780th year of our Lord could possibly doubt that a system that was rooted in a frizzled hangman, powdered gold lace, pumped in white silk stockings, would ever see the very stars go out? Monsignor, having eased his 4 men of their burdens and taking his chocolate, caused the doors of the holiest of holies to be thrown open, and he issued forth. Then, what submission, what cringing and fawning, what servility, what abject humiliation! As to bowing down in body and spirit, nothing in that way was left for heaven, which may have been one among other reasons why the worshippers of Monsignor never troubled it. Bestowing a word of promise here and a smile there, a whisper on one happy slave and a wave of the hand on another, Monsignor affably passed through his rooms to the remote region of the circumference of truth. There, Monsignor turned and came back again, and so, in due course of time, he got himself shut up in his sanctuary by the chocolate sprites, and was then seen no more. The show being over, the flutter in the air became quite a little storm, and the precious little bells went ringing down the stairs. There was soon only one person left of all the crowd, and he, with his hat under his arm and his snuff-box in hand, slowly passed among the mirrors on his way out. "I devote you," said this person, stopping at the last door on his way and turning in the direction of the sanctuary, "to the devil." And with that he shook the snuff from his fingers as if he had shaken dust from his feet, and quietly walked downstairs. He was a man of about 60, handsomely dressed, haughty in manner, and with a face like a fine mask. A face of transparent paleness, every feature on it clearly defined, one set expression. The nose, beautifully formed, was very slightly pinched at the top of each nostril. In those two compressions, or dints, the only little change that the face ever showed resided. They persisted in changing colors sometimes, and they would occasionally be dilated and contracted by something like a faint pulsation. Then they gave a look of treachery and cruelty to the entire countenance. Examined with attention, its capacity of helping such a look was to be found in the line of the mouth and the lines in the orbits of the eyes being much too horizontal and thin. Still, in effect, the face made, it was a handsome and remarkable one. Its owner went down the stairs into the courtyard, got into his carriage, and drove away. Not many people had talked with him at the reception. He had stood a little space apart, and Monsignor might have been warmer in his manner. It appeared, under the circumstances, rather agreeable to him to see the common people dispersed before his horses, often barely escaping from being run down. His servant drove as though he were charging an enemy, and the furious recklessness of the man brought no check into that face or lips of the master. The complaint had sometimes made itself audible, even in that deaf city and dumb age, that in the narrow streets without footways, the fierce patrician custom of hard driving endangered and maimed the vulgar in a quite barbarous manner. But few cared enough for that to think of it a second time, and in this manner, as in all others, the common folk were left to get out of their difficulties however they could. With a wild rattle and clatter, and an inhuman abandonment of consideration not easy to be understood in these days, the carriage dashed through the streets and swept round the corners, with women screaming before it and men clutching each other and clutching children out of the way. At last, swooping at a street corner by a fountain, one of the wheels came to a sickening little jolt, and there was a loud cry from a number of voices, and the horses began to rear and plunge. But for later inconvenience, the carriage probably would not have stopped. Carriages were often known to drive on and leave the wounded behind, and why not? But the frightened valet had gotten down in a hurry, and then there were 20 hands at the horse's bridle. "What has gone on?" said the monsieur, looking out. A tall man in a nightcap had caught up a bundle from among the feet of the horses and had laid it at the basement of the fountain, and was down in the mud and wet, howling over it like a wild animal. "Pardon, Monsieur le Marquis," said a ragged and submissive man. "It is a child." "Why does he make that abominable noise? Is it the man's child?" "Excuse me, Monsieur the Marquis. It is a pity, yes." The fountain was a little ways away, for the street opened where it was into a space some 10 or 12 yards square. As the tall man suddenly got up from the ground and came running at the carriage, Monsieur le Marquis clapped his hand for an instant on his sword hilt. "Killed!" shrieked the man in wild desperation, extending both of his arms full length above his head and staring. "Dead!" The people closed around and looked at Monsieur le Marquis. There was nothing revealed by the many eyes that looked at him except for watchfulness and eagerness. There was no visible menacing or anger. Neither did the people say anything after that first cry. They were silent, and they remained so. The voice of the submissive man who had spoken was flat and tame in its submission. Monsieur the Marquis ran his eyes over them all, as if they were mere rats who had come out of their holes. He then took out his purse. "It is extraordinary to me," he said, "that you people cannot take care of yourselves and your children. One or the other of you is ever in the way. How do I know what injury you have done to my horses? See here, give him that." And he threw out a gold coin for the valet to pick up, and all of the heads craned forward so that all of the eyes might look down on it as it fell. The tall man cried out again, "Dead!" He was arrested by the quick arrival of another man, for whom the rest made way. On seeing this man, the miserable creature fell upon his shoulder, sobbing and crying, pointing to the fountain where some women were stooping over the motionless bundle and moving gently around it. The women were as silent, however, as the men. "Oh, I know all," said the most recent man who had come. "Be a brave man, my Gaspard. It is better for the poor little plaything to die so than to live. It has died in a moment with no pain. Could it have lived an hour as happily?" "Oh, you, a philosopher, you there," said the Marquis. "What do they call you?" "They call me Defarge," said the man. "What is your trade?" "Monsieur the Marquis, I am a vendor of wine." "Pick up that, philosopher and vendor of wine," said the Marquis, throwing him another gold coin, "and spend it as you will. The horses there, are they all right?" And without deigning to look at the assembly a second time, Monsieur the Marquis leaned back in his seat and was just being driven away with the air of a gentleman who had accidentally broken some common thing and had paid for it and could afford to pay for it, when suddenly his ease was disturbed by a coin flying into his carriage window and ringing on the floor. "Hold!" said Monsieur. "Hold the horses! Who threw that?" It looks like there's going to be a fight. He looked to the spot where Defarge, the vendor of wine, had been standing a moment before, but the wretched father was groveling on his face in the pavement at that very spot, and the figure that stood beside him was the figure of a dark, stout woman who was knitting. "You dogs!" said the Marquis, but he said this smoothly, and with an unchanged front except for the spots on his nose. "I would ride over any of you quite willingly and exterminate you from the earth if I knew which rascal threw at the carriage, and if that brigand were sufficiently near, he would be crushed under my wheels." So cowed was their condition, and so long and so hard their experience of what a man like this could do to them within the law and beyond it, that not a voice or a hand or even an eye was raised. Among the men, not one. But the woman who stood knitting looked up steadily and looked the Marquis in the face. It was not for his dignity to notice it, but his contemptuous eye passed over her and over all the rest of the rats as he leaned back into his seat again and gave the word to move on. He was driven on, and other carriages came whirling by in quick succession. The minister, the state projector, the farmer general, the doctor, the lawyer, the ecclesiastic, the grand opera, the comedy, the whole fancy ball, in a bright continuous flow came whirling by. The rats had crept out of their holes to look on, and they remained looking on for hours. Soldiers and police often passing between them and the spectacle, making a barrier behind which they slunk and through which they peered. The father had long ago picked up his bundle and hidden himself away with it, when the woman who had tended the bundle while it lay at the base of the fountain sat there watching the running of water and the rolling of the fancy ball. When the one woman who had stood conspicuous knitting, and was still knitting on with the steadfastness of fate. The water of the fountain ran, the river ran, the day ran into evening. So much life in the city ran to death according to the rule. Time and tide waited for no man. The rats slept huddled close together in their dark holes again, and the fancy ball was lit up at supper, and all things ran their course. And that is the end of chapter 7. So I guess we know what's going on in Paris now, don't we? Doesn't sound like anything good. I would make a political comment, but I'm not going to. But yeah, it sounds like the little people are getting squished by the rich and uncaring. And you gotta wonder how much longer the little people are going to be able to stand that. That does make sense. This novel was written around the time of the French Revolution, and I do like this little bit of political intrigue. Although now I wonder what's going on in London. London and Paris. Two cities. What is it? Is it Shakespeare? Two houses, both alike in something? You can tell I'm not cultured. But I am kind of enjoying that. I liked the contrast between, I'm assuming that Monseigneur was probably the French king, and then everybody else is just Monsieur, because I can't think of anybody other than a French king who could not manage to drink his hot chocolate without 4 people waiting on him. Oh, yeah. I'm not sure that I completely understand the thing about him marrying his daughter to a farmer general, because I'm not sure what a farmer general is, but I'm kind of assuming it's he married off his daughter to someone who had come up in the trades rather than being a part of the nobility. Hopefully we'll get more explained about that later. Anyway, it is a beautiful day. I am going to enjoy the lightening of mood that brings me. Thank you for listening. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out, and I will see you on Saturday.